Hello, ladies. This episode is sponsored by the Fiat Institute. So if you've been listening to our show for any amount of time, you likely know that Fiat Institute is a company that I, Jamie Rachi, co-host of the Hormone Genius Podcast, own. I started this organization a couple years ago, and I certify women to become hormone coaches. So it's likely that as you're listening to our episodes, you are feeling a deep conviction to serve the women in your world. But you may think to yourself, wait, I can't. I haven't gone to med school. I'm not a nurse. I don't have an advanced degree in a healthcare arena. Well, I have some good news for you, ladies, because I created this program for you. I created this program for the woman who wants to start a hormone coaching business and make a change in this world. So if you are looking to make an impact while making an income, again, be sure to visit my website, www.fiatinstitute.com. You can also find me on Instagram at Fiat Institute. I hope to be in touch with you soon and enjoy our episode.
I do want women to know that there is an alternative to suppressing their bodies with hormones, that they can see their body as a good and they can live in that body holistically.
Totally. Oh my gosh.
It's amazing.
Join co-hosts Jamie Rachi and Teresa Kenny as they educate women about the beauty of the feminine design and empower women to take charge of their health.
They're going to be so amazing. You're going to be so empowered by understanding your feminine genius and your hormone genius. I don't think I could live my whole life knowing this and not sharing it with anyone. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Hormone Genius Podcast. I am here, of course, with my co-host, Teresa Kenny, and we are welcoming Jen Winkler to our show today. And I am just so pleased to have her on our show because I've come to know her over the last couple years, and I really believe our listeners are just going to love this one. I'm going to give you a little overview of Jen, and then we're going to dig in a bit more. So Jen struggled with PCOS, epilepsy, anxiety, depression, and more throughout her young adult life. But in 2018, she was tired of doctors not knowing what to do and took health into her own hands. She adopted a low-carb, ketogenic approach and was able to balance her hormones, reverse PMS, PCOS, and even improved her epilepsy. She then pursued becoming a national board certified health and wellness coach, as well as a functional blood chemistry specialist in order to help exhausted women who struggle with situations she can relate with. She helps women navigate through all the noise in the health and wellness space in order to learn how to adopt the right diet and lifestyle for their individual self, their health concerns, and then what works for their lifestyle and budget. She is also now a certified hormone coach, so with the Fiat Institute. So welcome, Jen, to our show.
Thanks for having me on. This is awesome. It's a real privilege.
Yes, totally. Well, you know what? We're going to really start digging in. The goal of our show today is to talk about metabolism, insulin resistance, those sorts of things. But Jen, let's start off a little bit with how you came to learn about the importance of managing blood sugar, insulin, and all of that. And so I know, having worked with you the last couple of years, you shared with me that you have epilepsy. Mm-hmm. And so I can say epilepsy is something I don't know much about, and probably some of our listeners do know a lot about because maybe they struggle with epilepsy. So let's first just share with our listeners what epilepsy is. And then let's kind of start with that journey and share with our listeners throughout that journey some of the, things that you learned, and we'll work together to help our listeners kind of really come to realize the importance of understanding what we put in our mouth, how we live our life, and all of that. So,
yeah, for sure. So when I was 12 years old, I was diagnosed with juvenile myoclonic epilepsy, JME. So there are different versions of epilepsy. It's basically epilepsy is once you have more than one seizure, they can diagnose you with epilepsy. One seizure doesn't necessarily mean epilepsy, but it is a disorder of having seizures. So for myself, it was 2 of them within, I think, 3 months. First one was in computer class. You remember the old green screen, like Oregon Trail when we were in computer class? Like that was my first seizure, was in front of the computer. And then the next one was sleep deprivation at a friend's sleepover. And the next morning is when I had it. So diagnosed me with that. I've been on multiple medications for it. They would work until they didn't. Typically, I guess that would go into a deeper hole I was going to say with that. But I've tried multiple medications. It wasn't working. Towards the end, I actually studied abroad in Austria when I went to Franciscan and had 5 seizures there. And that was kind of like the climax of, okay, what's going on? I looked up natural remedies. All I could find was ketogenic, and they would say it's only for children. And it was just a really long journey. So yeah, that's kind of a basic summary of how that came about.
So where is the kind of the place where you realize, almost like you're probably smarter than your doctors? I mean, you get to the point where sometimes you have a diagnosis, but your body is in your hands. Like only you can truly kind of find the unique pathways towards healing as an individual. And I think that's what so many people who listen to our podcast and podcasts in any realm of health, they're trying to find that unique pathway for their own body to heal and restore whatever it is they're suffering with. So how did that journey kind of happen for you?
Yeah. So eventually, I mean, that was like in my 20s. And in my 20s is when I also got diagnosed with PCOS. And I saw a NAPRO doctor, and he was the one that finally said, yeah, you have polycystic ovarian syndrome. I wasn't super overweight at that time. My whole life, my weight has gone drastically high to drastically low due to the medications for epilepsy. That was just one of the natural side effects. So at the time of diagnosis, I was having extremely painful periods. I mean, I would take off work, I'd be in bed, nothing helps. They prescribed naproxen and all these like painkiller ones, nothing was helping. Really heavy periods, all the typical PMS symptoms. So he said, yeah, you have PCOS, gave me metformin, wasn't really helping much at all. So I think that's when I kind of started slowly, the seed was planted, like there's something else there that either they don't know or they're not telling me, one or the other. I like to err on the side of mercy and say maybe they just didn't know, So that was around 25. And then I've traveled around doing mission work and stuff. And when I came back to Arizona for a new job, met my husband, I was still suffering, still doing the best. And my medication in the meantime for epilepsy has continually increased because I was getting these symptoms that I thought were seizures, and they were not. I found out much later on. But they just kept increasing it. And it got to the point that I couldn't drive. I couldn't sleep well. I was getting insomnia. And the doctors did not take into consideration the side effect of the medication. The medication I was on, the main side effects were all mental health stuff. And instead they said, this was my breaking point. And when I went to them and told them my concern, I had just had a son, he was less than a year old. And I mean, every mom doesn't sleep well for the son, but that wasn't my reason. Like he would be sleeping and I just couldn't sleep. And the doctor said, have you ever looked at a psychiatrist? And I have nothing against, psychiatrists and all that. I did that when I was younger, but I knew that wasn't it. I was living a blessed life. I loved my life, and there was something else going on. So that was my breaking point. Cried on the way home and started looking again, like what can I do? My husband and I came across a Netflix documentary called The Magic Pill, and it was a very objective documentary. I'm not big on those kind of things. I'll just watch them for fun. But this one showed a girl with autism completely reversing it with ketogenic and being able to speak, and epilepsy. And I think another one was depression. I can't remember. So we just decided to try it together. And we're like, okay, I've heard ketogenic helps epilepsy. Let me just try it. That was my main focus. No, I didn't even care about the hormone stuff at that time. I just wanted to get off this medication. And by doing it, and I eventually found a dietitian to guide me as well, which is, I highly suggest people to find someone to guide them to do it, because there are many different versions of ketogenic. And now with the food industry hopping on the marketing bandwagon, it'll totally mess it up. So that being said, we both did it together. It helped his colitis. And then I was able to sleep better. I was noticing my clothes getting looser. It's like, oh, this is more than just for epilepsy, right? And then I would go to my neurologist, and she's like, okay, yeah, maybe we can reduce meds. We'll see. And I was just done with that. So I found another doctor who actually has published studies on ketogenic for adults with epilepsy, and he happened to be here. I got in within 2 weeks, which was crazy because they're like 8-month waits. And he said, you are on way too much medication. We need to get you down. Like, you're doing ketogenic right. It's helping. We did what's called an ambulatory EEG. So it's they stick the probes on your head and it's there for 3 days and they measure any epileptic activity. He said, what you think is epileptic activity is not. I don't know what it is, but it's not. So he took me completely off of one of the medications and said, let's just do this slowly. You're an adult. You have a child to take care of. Let's work on it. And over the course of 2 years, we titrated my medication to the lowest dose I've ever had in my whole life. So I'm still on some, but it's low dose. So all that to say, Teresa, like, and throughout that journey, you see little inklings of, I found this myself and I was able to find someone who can support me in it. And why didn't the doctors tell me about this? The more research I've done, the more I've seen. Ketogenic was established in the 1920s for epilepsy. So that was how ketogenic started back then, before pharmaceuticals. But it's so much easier for doctors to just prescribe a pill and say, here you go. Oh, let's just up the dose. And they're so overwhelmed. Like I say, I like to have mercy on them. They have a very busy schedule and they have to match the, work with the insurance and all these crazy things. So I don't have any disregard for doctors. I use conventional medicine myself, but it just made me start wondering what else is there. So that's kind of the story with epilepsy. And then I started seeing how it's helping my blood sugar, like the hypoglycemia that I also was diagnosed with was going away, the symptoms of it. So then I started monitoring that. And I mean, that's a whole nother thing we can get into, but I feel like I'm blabbing on and on.
No, this is great. This is great. I didn't realize that the ketogenic diet was for created for epilepsy, like people who struggled with that. So I'm just thinking about some of our listeners who may be listening to this episode for the first time. And I would love for you to give an overview of when we say ketogenic, like what does that mean? So let's talk about what the ketogenic diet is. And then I would love for us to get into more of how that changes in diet also started to affect your hormones.
So there are different versions of ketogenic, the therapeutic ketogenic diet for things like epilepsy, and they're now using it for autism, ADHD, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, mental health illnesses, is basically a very high fat diet, moderate protein, and very low carb. The percentages for therapeutic is usually about 75% of your caloric intake. To 80% is fat, and then about 15% to 20% is protein, and then the last 5% is carbs. So typically you're under 30 grams total of carbs, and you want to make sure they come from real food sources, your vegetables, very low glycemic fruits. Protein is typically animal-based, is the ideal, and then the fats would be healthy fats. Your butter, ghee, lard, tallow, fats that are already inherent to the meat. So olive oil, coconut oil, all of those. When someone does the ketogenic diet, their body goes into what's called keto adaptation, fat adaptation. They're similar, but slightly different. And their body starts producing ketones, and ketones naturally fight the cytokines. They can go into the blood barrier and they heal different types of inflammation that's going on. So there are thousands, hundreds of thousands of stories of different types of inflammation people have had, and they do ketogenic and the inflammation completely lowers. So that is a very, very basic summary of the ketogenic diet. And some people do it for weight loss because it does work in that sense. Your body starts learning how to burn fat. And once you become fat adapted, if you're not consuming enough fat, it will start burning the fat on your own body. So that's kind of the mechanism that happens there.
That was perfect. Well, Teresa, do you have any questions about or any additional thoughts about ketogenic diet? And then Jennifer, just the next one was just how that lifestyle change affected then these other hormone things. But Teresa, did you have, I felt like your eyes kind of lit up. So I wasn't sure if you had any other questions.
Well, all of this is so, it speaks to me because, we had a whole ketogenic episode as well, Jen, but I had been to this conference in 2017 called Tripping Over Truth, and it was like amazing, but they were going into the metabolic reasons for disease. And it was much related to kind of using therapeutic ketogenesis for all sorts of things, not just epilepsy. The only thing I would say is what's cool is where I worked at Pope Paul VI Institute for 20 years, Dr. Hilgers, who did all this work in NAPRA technology, he had an interest also in seizures, not from the ketogenic standpoint, but from the use of progesterone. And so this will go into the hormone aspect of it. So, and I even had a patient, a young girl who came to see me from New York City. She had been seeing a doctor there who was giving her progesterone to prevent her seizures because, this has to do with, again, the neurons in the brain and kind of like, in a sense, like calming your brain, right? But really it's affecting kind of the firing of neurons, which can trigger epilepsy or seizures for people. But progesterone also has this kind of incredible effect on preventing seizures. So it's so cool when you have these like doctors that are interested in being outside the box a little bit. Interested in kind of pushing medicine to a next direction and taking what we know about the human body and its pathophysiology and being like, if progesterone does this, or if ketone bodies do this, maybe, it has this effect in the body. Like being able to actually like think and actually, make those kind of like connections as a physician. I don't know. I think it's unique. I don't think most doctors do. They learn protocols, they apply protocols.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no. Okay. I absolutely love this. This is great because I wasn't really tracking my seizures when they were happening, but then later on, when I really thought about it, I wasn't having them as often as some people. Some people will have like 20 a day. It's crazy. For myself, it was like once, and then maybe like a few months later, and then maybe like a year later. But once I really started checking it out, like the last time when I was in Austria and I had the 5, I was there for 5 months and I had 5 seizures. So my hunch is that they were happening as my progesterone was going down and I was about to get my period. And those catamenial. Thank you. I knew it was something. Catamenial seizures. So I tend to wonder, is that really what was happening? Progesterone has the luteal phase has always been my favorite phase. I love talking about progesterone. It is super important. And I think that is a big thing for a lot of women don't realize they're depleted in it. So back to your question, Jamie, where you said like, how did it help my hormones? How did ketogenic help my hormones? Well, hormones, if you've ever looked at a cascade of where they're developed, it comes ultimately from cholesterol. And if you are consuming enough cholesterol, we have demonized cholesterol in this country, which is such a travesty because that is really the basis of it. Now, we don't want to overdo it. And the combination of cholesterol with high carb processed foods, sugars, yes, that's going to be the problem. But again, combining those, that's the issue. It's not cholesterol in itself. So I really believe eating the cholesterol from my eggs, from my butter, etc., normalized my cycle. I no longer get debilitating cramps during my period. That's another thing we normalize as women. Like, oh yeah, we're supposed to be crampy and cranky. And no, it'll be like, oh, I see my luteal phase is about 14 days. Okay, 14 days is coming. My period's supposed to come. And it'll just come. And it'll just be normal life. I can still go to the gym. I can still work out. It doesn't stop me from living my life. I don't get my migraines anymore. Before my period, that was another one I had. All, as we know, symptoms of progesterone deficiency. So, so I think that's kind of the basis. Also, my insulin was regulated. So I, as a functional blood chemistry specialist, when I look at someone's insulin, I like it to be between 1 and 5. 10, maybe, depending on what their history was. But 1 and 5 is like the optimal sweet spot. So mine consistently over the years has been about 3 to 6, depending on what cycle of life I'm in and what I'm doing. So it's been there. My blood sugar is great. All my blood markers have vastly improved, and just an outlook on life. Being a mom is hard sometimes when your kiddo's tough, and being able to have patience with him. And I've heard other people tell me the same with their stories, clients I've worked with, like, I can't believe how patient I am with my kid, that I can actually listen to them and not just burst out in anger and fumes and all that stuff. So I could go on and on different ways that it's helped me, but that's the.
So, I think about, a lot of, people may be thinking, oh, okay, what Jen's saying is like ketogenic is good It could be good for me, right? Could it be good for me? And I think this is the key whenever we're talking about a particular like nutritional pathway. What I want people to know is ketogenic is good and it is therapeutic for certain conditions, but it's not the only way always to reduce inflammation. So I get back to that kind of heart issue. And I know you know a lot about this too, Jen, in terms of inflammation. Ketogenics reduces inflammation. Ketone bodies themselves, as you said, they actually have a particular affinity for reducing inflammatory markers in our body. However, most people are inflamed not because they're not eating ketogenic. They're inflamed because they're not eating healthy, period.
Right.
So, the key is where we have to reduce inflammation. Ketogenic is a pathway to do that. Someone might be called to it, but it's not the only way.
Correct. Yeah, I 100% agree. And I don't put all my clients on ketogenic. I have a client right now I'm working with. She wears a continuous glucose monitor. Mostly diabetics will wear it, but I have a program I work through that. I can get my clients that. And she was getting hypoglycemia. She's very small. She's again, not big. I think a lot of people think PCOS, type 2 diabetes, people are always heavy set. But for her, instead of just saying, okay, you have to lower your carbs to 30 grams, you have she really loved her food. There were certain foods that she really loved. We put on the CGM and watch how the foods affect her blood sugar. And this is something I'm starting to do with a lot of my clients a lot of people are driven by data. And if they see, whoa, my blood sugar went up to 170 with this one piece of bread, it gives them more intention to be like, maybe that's not the food for me. So what we're doing with her is we're kind of adjusting. Okay, we saw what sourdough did to your blood sugar. Like sourdough is a great bread for gut and digestibility, but not necessarily for blood sugar, like insulin resistance. So it's giving her that data that's slowly weaning her to a lower carb life. And I don't think she needs a full ketogenic. Like I'm not going to put her on that. The other aspect is for some people, and this is where I'm at now. It's been 6 years I've been following this lifestyle. I forgot to mention that part, but I've gotten to the point the past year where I flex in and out. And I think that is our ultimate goal. Is our ancestors were in ketosis at times. When they were hunting, they didn't have food, they would naturally go into ketosis. But if they came across like berry bushes and certain vegetables and stuff, they would have it and possibly be kicked out of ketosis. There's no way to absolutely know, but so that's what I do. Depending where I am in my cycle, I will flex in and out of ketosis. So as I get into the luteal phase, the last week before my period, and this is what I do with my hormone clients as well, is I help them figure out how to get out of ketosis. That is not the week to be burning fat, to be losing weight, to make the scale move. We just need to eat whole foods and eat healthy, get rid of the processed and the sugars, like you mentioned, Teresa, and just focus on maintaining. And that usually helps with the PMS and period symptoms as well. And then period comes back, we can implement some fasting and jump back into, so it's kind of this, just like our hormones are a little roller coaster, we do the same with the keto adaptation, the ketosis.
Love that. I love that. When I was speaking with the hormone coaches this last training call, the word cycle batching came to mind. And it is so true. Like we can batch our foods, we can batch our workouts, we can batch our productivity to where we're at in our cycle. And so just like that with the ketogenic diet and eating, to increase those ketones, it's true. Like it wouldn't behoove us to think about that as our lifestyle forever and ever. So I love how you can bring that in and then out and then also be working with your clients in that same way. Okay. So Jen, we know, like Teresa and I know, and you know, that PCOS is a huge, huge issue, like an epidemic in the United States of America for women.
Yeah, for sure.
So many women struggle with PCOS. Often many women don't even realize they have PCOS. And so we know insulin resistance is a driver. And it's something that many women who struggle with PCOS, not all, may struggle with this. And I know you mentioned that was your struggle too. Can you explain to our listeners, because again, I love some of the analogies that you would share in class. Can you explain to our listeners a little bit about what that's like when our body isn't working optimally, and if we're not taking in the right kinds of foods, or if our blood sugar is spiking so quickly? Like, what does that mean for our body?
Yes. So, okay. I'm going to try and keep this as like layman's terms as possible and use that analogy you mentioned. When we are eating high carb, and when I say high carb, if you ever measure your macros, it's typically over 300 grams. A lot of us, when we're eating a standard American diet, it's very high up there. So when you consume the high carb, your glucose, your blood glucose goes up. To give a reference range, we typically have about 1 teaspoon of glucose in our blood at any time. Whenever it rises above a teaspoon, then our pancreas releases insulin to remove the excess glucose from our blood and either store it in our liver or our muscles. Those are typically the two places it'll store as glycogen, which is like, let's say we were, again, I like to always go back to our ancestors. If they stored the glycogen and then a bear came and they had to run, that's immediate energy. Just it'll start burning the glycogen and boom. So glucose is more of an immediate energy. Fat burning tends to take longer. That being said, the insulin is released. Now, if you were to do that over and over and over again, the studies have shown that people are spiking their glucose up to 20 times a day, the average person. So up to 20 times a day, your body's releasing insulin. Eventually, it gets tired of it. There becomes a resistance in a sense where it's one of the analogies I use is, okay, if you're studying at home and someone keeps knocking on the door like every 5 seconds, you're not going to get your studying done. It's going to be like, oh my gosh, would you stop knocking on my door? And that would be the glucose eating like every hour kind of thing, 2 hours. There's also, if you're eating a bolus amount of carbs at one time, that's like a whole bunch of people coming to the door and you just, oh, what do I do? I can't answer. So that's what's happening at the cellular level when the insulin is trying to move the glucose into muscle or liver. Eventually the muscle and liver, also, if you're not like an athlete, you're not working out all the time, the glycogen, the liver and muscle can only store so much glycogen. So then it gets spill over into the fat cells. And that's how people gain weight with too many carbs. The other aspect is like, okay, well, what is this insulin that you talk of, Jen? Like, what does that matter? When we go to doctors, a lot of times they'll only check fasting glucose and maybe your hemoglobin A1C, which is your overall, it's basically an average of your blood sugar in the past 3 months. That's the simplest way to say it. If those numbers are okay, doctors will be like, yeah, you're fine, no problem. My biggest pet peeve is when they don't check insulin. If you were to pay out of pocket for the blood work of insulin, it is $12. $12, and that is it. Insurance hikes the price a little bit, but it's not going to be much. A lot of doctors will say, no, it's not a big deal. Okay, why is it such a big deal? This is why. Insulin typically rises. It's going to keep trying to match your glucose input. Like if you're consuming 50 grams of carbs, okay, it's not going to spit out as much insulin. But if you are eating 300 grams, it's going to keep pushing it higher. Measuring insulin tells us where the insulin resistance is at. I have clients number of times, glucose is fine, A1C is fine, insulin is 20, 30, 35. It's getting on the brink of becoming diabetic and insulin resistant. And the analogy I give, this is where I was getting at, is if you were driving your car and the speed limit's 40 miles per hour, right? If you're just driving, the speedometer says 40 miles per hour, you're like, I'm good, no worries. But you have to also look at the RPMs. I always forget what that one's called. If your RPM is up at like 7, 8, that's a problem. There's a problem in your car. It doesn't matter if you're going 40 miles an hour. The RPMs are too high. So you're going to be like, oh my gosh, it's going to burn out. Something's going to happen. And that's essentially what happens with insulin resistance. Versus some people might see your glucose, up at, 105 or something. That would be equivalent to going 75 miles an hour. But if your RPMs are low at 1, that's okay. Well, I mean, we got to be careful with that one because then that gets into type 1 diabetics as well. But let's just say it's like at a normal range. It's okay. Your engine isn't working so hard to keep the glucose at a normal level. So that's why any client I have, I always measure insulin or C-peptide as well, depending on their symptoms, because it's a bit more stable version of measuring insulin. But it's just super important. You have to know where your insulin is at, especially for PCOS and other hormonal disruptions similar to it.
And I want to clarify, Jennifer, that that's a fasting insulin you're talking about. So,
Yes.
if you were going to ask about this blood test, these numbers that Jen is talking about, less than 10 being ideal, less than 6 really being optimal, that's a fasting insulin level. And so that's what you're going to be asking for. And I also want to talk about, when you mentioned the fact that an insulin level is only $12, we are getting to the point in society. And I just was talking to I often do this with my patients. I had a 24-year-old come to me, and she really wants blood work, right? I mean, she's been listening to the podcast and she's like, I want all these things. And then I have to explain to her what her insurance means. People who have insurance don't understand when you're in your young 20s, what a deductible is, what co-insurance is, what insurance companies charge for labs versus what a lab actually is going to charge you for it if you just cash paid it. And so I was explaining all of this, and the girl's like, oh my gosh, no, I didn't know any of that. Right. And that's okay. Yeah. I didn't know any of that until I got an $800 bill. And I was like, I thought my insurance covered this. Right. Yeah. So just so you know, just because your insurance covers something, you still have all of these metrics that you have to, overcome: your deductible, your co-insurance, whatnot. So someday maybe we'll do an entire podcast on that. But I just want to say
that would be fascinating.
But you were getting to the point where, let's say, and I told this girl yesterday, I said, if you want these labs, but you're afraid your insurance company is, you're going to have to pay out of pocket for it, why don't you ask the lab what it would cost to get a vitamin D, to get an iron check, to get an insulin level? They'll give you a client billed rate for that. And I guarantee you, it's probably going to be less than $100. So, ask the question, can I cash pay for my labs? Even if you have insurance, it may work out to be a better deal for you.
Yeah, 100%. And that's what I do with my clients. I work through a third-party company called DHA Laboratory. So I get special price. Not only is it private pay cheaper, but I bundle into different categories. So I have like a Peak Plus 6 hormone panel. I have a Day 3 hormone panel. I have a thyroid panel. And so when I bundle it together, it becomes even cheaper self-pay. But I hope you don't mind me mentioning this other part is people can actually this day and age order their own labs. And there's a website called ownyourlabs, I think .com or .org. I don't remember which one it is. And you can order your own. Now, obviously you need a practitioner to help you, read it out and understand what the numbers mean. But if you, hear on this podcast and you say, I want to know what my insulin level is, and your doctor refuses, you can go on ownyourlabs.com and order insulin. And then, find a practitioner such as myself or anyone else who can read those labs and help you. But I do like to say, I look at it from a functional standpoint, holistic. So it's not just if your insulin's okay, it's okay. I look at everything all together, liver, process, gut health, all those kind of things too. So it's holistic.
Jen, let's talk real quick about the continuous blood glucose monitor. How can someone find that? What's the process? I mean, I've always been so interested in doing that, but it seems, I don't know if it seems scary, but it just seems beyond the everyday. So can you explain, if somebody was interested in that, is that also something that someone can just go on to a website, order, and how does that whole process work?
Yeah, definitely. It's been an amazing tool for a lot of people, including myself. So what a continuous glucose monitor is, it's this little device that you attach to your the backside of your arm. So there's a little needle, and when you push it onto your arm, it's hard to do this in audio, but when you push it on there, it stays there for 2 weeks, basically. And there's a little filament. So there's no needle that stays in your arm. It's a little filament that measures your glucose level in the interstitial fluid. So not necessarily your blood, but interstitial fluid, which is typically very, very close to the blood glucose. It stays on for 2 weeks. You can do one after the other. You just rotate arms. And you either have a little device or you can get an app on your phone and you scan it to your arm and it tells you what your glucose level is at that time. I tell people, take the number with, not with a grain of salt, but it's not the exact glucose number. But I tell people to look at the ranges that happen. So how high did it spike? Is it going low? Some people who have difficulty sleeping, their blood sugar is dipping very low in the evening. I've had a number of clients that was the case. They put on a CGM. They're like, oh, it's the blood sugar. It's not necessarily the progesterone or other hormones. So we're able to target that and help with the blood sugar regulation through that time. Okay, as far as how to get one, unfortunately, there isn't it's not as easy as blood work these days. I have had people with type 2 diabetes ask their doctor for a prescription for it, and they say, no, you don't need it. So depending on your doctor, you can get a prescription, and depending on your insurance, as Teresa was mentioning, with deductibles and stuff, it can cost $70 to $100 per CGM, even with insurance. GoodRx is one that some people might use to kind of help lower the cost. If your doctor says, no, you don't need it, you're not diabetic, you don't have insulin resistance, et cetera, even though they haven't checked, there are companies out there such as Testimonial. There's one I really love working with called Fiat Health, so THEIA. And you can work under a practitioner such as myself, where I get to see your trends, the blood sugar trends, and I can help guide you if you're like, what does this mean? Was this bad? Was this good? What caused it? Your practitioner sees everything. So Fiat Health is who I work with, and they're pretty affordable. They have an annual subscription fee to use their app, and then it's about $70 a CGM for that whole year. So you can do like 1 month worth, work on some stuff, come back again 3 months later, order some more. It's really user friendly, and my clients have helped, or it's helped my clients a lot with that. That's what I mean.
It's kind of amazing that it's that affordable, honestly. And, I mentioned Peter Attia a lot, but, he's always been huge into, CGM for a really long time because, you don't know as an individual, again, our bodies are unique. You may be someone who's incredibly thin, but wake up with a fasting blood sugar that's over 100 every day. Mm-hmm. It might have to do with your cortisol awakening response and stress going on. You might be somebody who, again, responds to bread, like you said, in a unique way versus somebody else. Their blood sugar might not really go up much. So it allows an incredible amount of individuality and motivational, ability to really, target your unique body. And blood sugar regulation, I mean, I'm sure you believe this too, but it probably is one of the most important things that anybody could do to prevent chronic disease. Because hyperinsulinemia is so damaging from a long chronic perspective to the body, keeping our insulin levels in check, first and foremost, not even blood sugar, but keeping those insulin levels in check is what decreases inflammation in the body. So it's just really important. And, we can't get it all out in one podcast and be like, here, just go do this. That's why we interview experts. That's why we're saying you have to have somebody who has expertise to guide you along the way. So someone like Jennifer can do this. There's lots of people out there who are being trained to help people get these things in a tighter control.
Yeah. And one thing to add on that, Teresa, is some people, they'll do ketogenic, low carb or whatever, and they'll do the fit your macros version. So as long as it's a low carb food, they'll be fine. I have this one client with the CGM and mini sweet peppers. She had about 10 grams worth of carbs of mini sweet peppers, and it spiked her glucose over 30 points, which is, if anybody doesn't know, that's pretty high for 10 grams of carbs. Your body should not be reacting that much. So if you are doing low carb, ketogenic, anything in that realm, and it's not working for you, whatever your goals are, it might be something as simple as putting on a CGM and seeing, is there a food I'm reacting to? Now, that's a whole different topic as to how to figure out why is the bell pepper spiking her blood sugar, but it wouldn't necessarily spike somebody else's. But yeah, it can be a really helpful tool to just kind of hone in on what works for you, your individuality.
Yeah. Don't you think in like another 10 years, everyone will have so much more? Like that'll just be part of our standard healthcare, is just monitoring this. The more we...
I sure hope so.
I hope so too. Yeah. Well, Jen, it's been such an amazing time sitting and talking with you today. We talked about your story, your epilepsy, and how you stumbled upon the ketogenic diet and how that helped ultimately first your epilepsy, but then how it then moved you forward into becoming really passionate about addressing many aspects of health, like your hormones, your PCOS, your insulin resistance. You've lost a ton of weight. You're so much healthier now, right? And you're just a vibrant go-getter trying to inform the world about the importance of lifestyle, hormone awareness, and all that. So Jen, what would you say? What do you wish every woman knew about her hormone genius?
I wish all women knew how, first of all, it's a symphony. It's beautiful. We shouldn't be putting down our hormones. Oh, dang, my period's here. This stinks. It's a beautiful, beautiful symphony of hormones, and how everything you not only consume, but expose yourself to impacts the hormones. And I know we didn't have time for this too, but just your circadian rhythm, getting outside, getting light, exercise, everything impacts those hormones. Xenoestrogens, there's so many things. Like you said, we can't do it all in a podcast, but it all impacts it. And if one thing hasn't fixed it, you can always try another aspect. Like it's just, yeah, I know I'm kind of like rambling a little bit, but basically everything impacts it, and it's beautiful. We should embrace our hormones. We should love them. We should be thankful for who we are as women. It makes us very unique in that aspect.
Awesome, Jen. And if people want to get a hold of you, how can they find you? What are your social media handles? Give them the details.
Yeah, thanks. So I am just barely starting a YouTube channel, so I will be on YouTube very soon. Everything is Coach Jen Winkler, and Jen with one N. Instagram, those two are the places I am most active. My website is jenwinkler.me. So I don't know who has .com, but I just chose .me. And I will actually be starting a new coaching group soon using CGMs. So if that is something that you are interested in, there will be a month-long coaching group where you get education on blood sugar management. What does it mean when it spikes and dips, et cetera? And you will get a CGM or 2 CGMs for the month. So that's something coming down the pipeline in a month or two. And when I do one-on-one coaching, I really do a lot with actual habit forming as well. So it's not just this is what you need to do. It's why are you in the habits that you're in? And let's kind of find a healthy way to break those habits. That's really what health coaching is. It's not just ordering the person what to do. So I do one-on-one. I'm starting some group coaching. Best way to get in touch is either Instagram or my website, and just hit the contact me and it'll reach me.
Thank you so much for spending time with us on the Hormone Genius Podcast.
Thank you. It's been a privilege.
Thanks for listening to the Hormone Genius Podcast. Please remember to share our podcast with your friends and family, and also follow us on social media. If you were not aware, we have a YouTube channel. So if you could like and subscribe to our YouTube channel to stay in the loop with all of our latest episodes, we would appreciate that. Thank you so much for your support. We are excited to journey alongside you as you discover the beauty and the genius of your hormones.